Man tried to sell his pregnant wife in the town market until a rancher arrived and bought her to save her life. The year was 1872, and the sun over Dry Ridge burned like a branding iron. Dust curled in the air, kicked up by the hooves of restless mules and the boots of men who didn't look each other in the eyes unless they had to. A market was sprawled across the town square, littered with goods no one really needed and voices no one really wanted to hear, except one. It cut through the noise like a blade. $10. The man shouted, staggering through the sun-beaten crowd. $10 for a wife, not just any wife, a strong one. She cooks, she cleans, and she don't talk back unless you hit her wrong. The townsfolk, haggard and half-interested, turned their heads. At first, it sounded like a cruel joke. But then they saw her. She was barefoot. Her dress, once ivory, was smeared with mud and dried blood along the hem. Her face bore the hollow look of someone who'd forgotten how to cry. Bruises peeked from beneath her collarbone like purple fingerprints, and her stomach curved outward, unmistakable beneath the threadbare fabric. The man beside her was drunk, his boots scuffed, his shirt sweat-soaked and open at the chest. He gripped her wrist with a raw, ringless hand. His beard was patchy, wild, and he reeked of whiskey and resentment. "She's pregnant," someone in the crowd whispered. "No law against sellin' what's yours," the man barked, scanning the onlookers. "You buy a horse. Don't ask if it's with foal." Same deal here. Someone spit near his feet. A woman covered her child's eyes. But no one moved. She didn't look up. Her name was Evelyn. 24, maybe 25. Her hair, once the color of chestnut bark, was now tangled and dulled by sun and despair. There was no resistance in her, just resignation. The kind you find in dying animals, too tired to flee. From behind the general store, the sheriff watched. He tilted his hat back and squinted, chewing slow on a toothpick. He didn't move either. Evelyn's mind drifted. Not away from the moment, no. It stayed rooted there. But memories pushed through the fog, bright and painful. A classroom. Children's laughter. Her fingers on a chalkboard. That was her once. Miss Evelyn Granger, schoolteacher in Layton, Kansas. Proper, kind, and painfully naive. But then there was Jedediah Boone, a cowboy in name, a gambler in truth. He had eyes like smoke and hands that lied when they held hers. He asked her to marry him under a sycamore tree with a promise and a bottle of stolen champagne. She said yes, because she thought love could fix things. Because she believed a man's demons could be reasoned with, the same way she used to calm crying children. A year later, their first child died. Fever took him before he turned one. Jed broke that winter. First with drink, then with fists. Now here they were, 1,000 miles from anything she called home, and he was selling her like an old mule. $10. $5. A voice barked from the back of the crowd. A joke, a cruel one. Laughter bubbled like bile. Jed turned sharply. She's worth more than that, damn it. Look at her. That's when the horse came into view. Tall and dark as molasses, it moved through the crowd without panic. Its rider sat steady, leaning slightly forward, one hand on the reins, the other resting on the saddle horn. He wore no badge, no hat worth noting, just a dust-stained duster and boots worn to the heel. His eyes were hidden under the brim, but his presence pulled silence like a storm cloud. He didn't speak right away, dismounted slowly, walked toward Jed and the woman. "Looking to buy, mister?" Jed sneered. $10 and she's yours. The man said nothing. He just stared first at Jed, then at Evelyn. She finally lifted her head. Only slightly. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Not recognition, but understanding. He didn't see a pregnant wife for sale. He saw a human being held hostage in plain sight. Without a word, He reached into his coat pocket and drew a coin. He let it fall into the dust between them with a dull clink. Jed looked down at it. A gold eagle. $20 in coin. But not a gift, an insult. That ain't the price, Jed growled. The man stepped closer. His voice was quiet, steady. It's what you'll take. Or you'll find out what else I carry in this coat. Jed hesitated. He looked at the man. Then at the crowd. Even the sheriff shifted on his feet now. No one backed Jed. Not anymore. With a grunt, he dropped Evelyn's wrist and scooped up the coin. Your problem now, he spat, and stumbled backward, vanishing into the line of wagons. The silence hung thick. The man didn't touch Evelyn, only turned and walked toward his horse. When she didn't follow, he looked over his shoulder. You comin'? She hesitated. Her legs didn't feel like they worked anymore. But then she moved, just a few steps. Enough to climb up behind him when he offered a hand. They rode out of Dry Ridge in silence, save for the murmurs behind them. No one followed. No one asked questions. As they rode, her arms wrapped loosely around his waist. Not trust, just balance. Her name, she said, was Evelyn. He told her his was Silas Boone, not no relation. He added flatly. She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't care. Hours passed. The sun dipped low, and the hills rolled on. They stopped at a creek before dusk. He let her drink first. Then she sat on a rock and stared at nothing. Why'd you do it? She asked at last. He removed his coat and poured water over his hands. Didn't seem right what he did. That's not an answer. He dried his palms on his trousers. No, it ain't. That night they camped beneath an aspen tree. He built the fire. She curled near it, clutching a wool blanket he pulled from his pack. Neither spoke of comfort. But for the first time in months, she slept. Silas took the first watch, eyes scanning the horizon. The coin he gave Jed was the last of its kind in his pocket. But he hadn't hesitated when he looked over at Evelyn. Sleeping, her hand over her stomach, he saw a woman clawing her way back from the edge of something dark. He didn't know what it would cost to bring her the rest of the way, but he suspected it would be everything. Morning came cold and sharp. They broke camp with few words. She moved slowly, stiff from sleep and pregnancy. He didn't help. Not because he didn't want to, but because she needed to move on her own. You headed somewhere? She asked as they rode. North, he said. Redstone Hills. She nodded. That where you live? For now. She looked away. You expect me to stay? No. She blinked. Then why take me? He hesitated. Seemed wrong to leave you. They rode in silence for a time. A hawk circled above. The road turned to dirt, then gravel. He knew of a place up the ridge, a cabin, half broken, but still standing. By noon they arrived. She took in the sight small, charred from a lightning fire years ago. Still it had walls, a roof, a bed of sorts. You can stay here, he said, dismounting. If you want. I'll be up the hill with the horses. She watched him walk away without another word. Inside, the cabin smelled of old smoke and pine. Dust blanketed everything, but it felt like shelter. She sank into a corner and let the stillness wrap around her. Her hand touched her stomach. The baby moved, just a flutter. A reminder she was still alive. A wind moved through the trees outside, whispering through the cracks in the wall. That night, she lit a candle, ate the bread and jerky he'd left her. She didn't cry, not yet. But the salt sat close behind her eyes. Silas came back only once before dark, left a bucket of water, and not a dot she wanted to thank him. She didn't. He didn't ask for it. That was the beginning. Not of something romantic, not yet, but of safety. And sometimes that's all a person needs to begin, remembering how to want more. Behind them, in Dry Ridge, the dust settled. Jed had vanished into whatever saloon or gutter would have him. But rumors spread like brushfire. That someone stood up to him. That a woman no one dared speak for had been taken. No, rescued. And far from the town's memory, in the cradle of the Redstone Hills, Evelyn finally slept without fear. The fire cracked softly. And somewhere nearby, Silas Boone watched the stars, wondering if redemption ever came to men like him, or only to those he could save. The air turned colder as they rode north, the land stretching wide like an unspoken challenge. Silence lingered between Evelyn and Silas, not out of awkwardness, but something more fragile like the quiet around a wounded animal unsure whether the next hand will heal or strike. Each day, the horizon inched farther, pulling them into a world neither fully trusted yet couldn't escape. Trees thickened. Grass grew wild and sharp. Civilization faded behind them like a memory best forgotten. Silas rarely spoke. When he did, it was short, purposeful. His voice carried weight, not because it was loud, but because it didn't waste itself on empty talk. Evelyn, for her part, said little. She watched him more than she listened, how he moved with ease, how his eyes never stopped scanning, how he seemed more comfortable among trees and sky than he ever would among people. On the third morning, a storm rolled in fast. The clouds were bruised purple, and the wind howled like something ancient and vengeful. Silas urged the horses faster, cutting east into a narrow canyon lined with jagged rock and scattered pine. Evelyn held tight to the saddle, her hands numb from cold. When the rain finally broke, it came in sheets ice cold and blinding. They took shelter beneath an overhang, barely wide enough for the two of them and the horses. Silas started a small fire with flint and dry moss from his saddlebag. Evelyn huddled near it, soaked to the skin, teeth chattering. She didn't complain. Her silence was not submission. It was endurance. "You need dry clothes," Silas said, pulling off his coat and handing it over. She hesitated. "I'll be fine." She murmured, "You won't." "Take it." She took it. The warmth was immediate, but it wasn't the coat. It was the first time someone had given her something without expecting a piece of her in return. As the storm raged outside, they sat facing the fire, shadows flickering across the stone walls. Evelyn watched him remove his boots, then check. A small scar near his ankle, a bite mark. "What happened there?" she asked. "Coyote," he said. "Back in Missouri." "Did it hurt?" He smiled faintly. "Still does." The fire popped. Silence returned, but it felt different now. Softer when morning came, the storm had passed. The canyon sparkled with frost. They resumed the ride, slower now, with the earth still slick and dangerous. They camped each night under stars, and each morning Evelyn woke with a little less fear. Her bruises began to fade. Her appetite returned. She still didn't trust Silas fully, but she no longer startled when he approached. Something in her had begun to shift, not faith, but awareness. He had saved her once, but he wasn't trying to own her. That, in itself, was unfamiliar. One night, as they camped beside a creek, Evelyn asked, "Why were you in Dry Ridge that day?" Silas stirred the fire, eyes distant. "Needed feed for the horses. Didn't plan to stay long. But you stayed. I saw you." The honesty in his voice stunned her. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Later, under a black sky thick with stars, she whispered, "Thank you." He didn't respond. But she noticed, for the first time, he smiled not out of politeness, but something gentler. Like relief. Days later, their journey took them into higher ground. Red cliffs loomed in the distance, Redstone Hills. A sharp wind swept the ridge, biting through clothes and bone. Evelyn's strength began to falter. Her belly, now nearly 5 months swollen, made every step a burden. She tried to hide it, but Silas noticed. "We'll rest soon," he said. She nodded, forcing a smile. That evening, They stopped near a thicket where wild raspberries grew. Evelyn picked a few, eating slowly, savoring sweetness she hadn't tasted in months. She offered one to Silas. He hesitated, then took it with a nod. The gesture was small, but it felt monumental. Just before dusk, the first signs of danger appeared. Tracks. HOOFPRINTS. Not theirs. Fresh. Heavy. Silas studied them with a frown. Trouble? She asked. Could be. They rode on cautiously, detouring through a gully and hiding their campfire behind a rock wall. That night, Silas didn't sleep. He sat upright with his rifle across his lap. Near dawn, the rustle came. Horses. 3. Men. Bandits, likely following since the canyon storm. Silas slipped from camp like a ghost. Evelyn clutched the rifle he left beside her, hands trembling. She didn't know how to use it, not really. But she would try. Gunfire cracked once, then silence. Then footsteps. She raised the rifle. It's me, Silas called softly. They're gone. She lowered the weapon, still shaking. He approached, a scrape across his cheek, but otherwise whole. You all right? He asked. She nodded. You? Better than they are. He took a seat near her, breath heavy. She stared at the gun in her lap. I've never held one before. You did fine. No, I didn't. I was scared. Being scared's how you stay alive. She looked at him. You're not scared? He paused. Always. That was the first night she fell asleep beside him, not for comfort, but because for the first time she felt guarded. The next morning, Silas whittled a small piece of wood as they waited for the horses to rest. It looked like a bird crude carving, but delicate in its way. He handed it to her without explanation. What is it? She asked. A kestrel, he said. They fly alone. She turned it in her hands. Did you carve this? I try. He said. Why? He didn't answer right away. Then, makes my hands busy when my mind gets loud? Evelyn said nothing. She understood that better than she could say. That afternoon, they passed through a narrow trail flanked by red cliffs. The wind howled through it like a morning song. She pulled the coat tighter around her, still clutching the bird. They came upon an old trading post near the Yaz. Wyoming border abandoned now, but once a stop for trappers and surveyors. Silas searched the ruins, while Evelyn sat on a fallen beam, catching her breath. Suddenly, a voice. Well, well. Ain't this a surprise? 3 men appeared, 2 armed, 1 unarmed, but smirking like he didn't need to be. Locals, maybe ex-soldiers. One of them spit near Evelyn's boot. You the one bought her? The smirking man asked Silas. Heard 'bout it from Dry Ridge. Brave thing, talking in someone else's trash. Silas didn't move. Don't want trouble. Too late, the man said. Some folks don't like a man talking property. That ain't rightly his. Evelyn's stomach twisted. Her hands clenched around the bird carving. She ain't property, Silas said. The first punch came quick. The smirk vanished when Silas ducked and countered. One man drew a knife. Silas turned it with his forearm, taking a slash across his side before throwing the man into a post. Blood soaked his shirt, but he kept moving. Evelyn wanted to scream, but she didn't. She picked up a rock, clutched it tight, ready. Then silence. The men fled, limping and cursing. Silas leaned against a beam, breath ragged. Evelyn was beside him, instantly pressing a cloth to the wound. Fools, he muttered. Didn't even aim right. You should sit. No time. Sit, Silas. He obeyed, not out of submission, but because her voice carried weight now. She cleaned the cut, hands steady despite the pounding in her chest. Why do you keep doing this? She whispered. He looked at her. Because you matter. The words were so simple, they nearly broke her. That night, they reached the base of the Redstone Hills. A wide valley stretched out, golden under twilight. In the distance, smoke curled gently from a chimney. Silas pointed. That's the ranch. It looked like heaven. When they arrived, she slid off the horse and stood on shaking legs. The house was modest wooden, weather-beaten, but strong. A fence wrapped around it. Beyond that, pastures stretched like open hands. He helped her inside. The fireplace was already stacked. He lit it with one match. She sat beside it, speechless. He brought water, bread, dried meat, laid it all out on the table. Then he hesitated. I'll be out with the horses, he said, turning to leave. Silas. He stopped. She stood slowly, her voice caught. You don't have to stay outside. Not tonight. His eyes flickered, surprised. I'll sleep here, he said, nodding to the hearth. Don't worry. I'm not worried, she replied. It was true. She lay on the bed, hand resting on her stomach. The baby moved again, like it knew they'd arrived somewhere safe. Outside, Silas sat on the porch, eyes on the stars. She watched him through the window until sleep took her. Not because she was exhausted, though she was, but because something inside her finally believed she might wake to something worth surviving for. And for the first time in what felt like years, she dreamed. The days passed with quiet dignity at the Redstone Ranch. Evelyn found herself waking to the sound of birds and the creak of the barn door swinging open. She would lie still for a moment, listening to Silas move about his work feeding the horses, mending the fence, stacking firewood with a rhythm that never seemed rushed. He was steady like the hills around them. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel watched or weighed. Her belly had grown heavy. The child moved with greater force now, a reminder of all she carried, not just the life inside her, but the wreckage that had brought her here. She'd stopped flinching when Silas entered the room, stopped clutching a knife in the dark. Slowly, inch by inch, she remembered how to breathe like a person who didn't expect to be hunted. Silas never asked questions. He didn't press her to talk or share memories she still wasn't sure how to speak of. But there were moments when their silences spoke louder than words. When he set down a second mug of coffee beside her without asking. When he chopped extra kindling and left it stacked neatly outside the door, knowing she'd never ask for help but still needed it. When she mended his shirts with slow, careful stitches, and he never said thank you, but always left a smooth stone or a carved piece of wood on the table. In return, it wasn't love. Not yet. It was something gentler. A growing recognition of the shape of each other's grief. But peace, she was learning, doesn't stay unchallenged. The trouble began with the buzz of flies on the wind and the glint of sunlight off distant metal. Evelyn noticed it first 3 days after a trip to the creek to wash linens. A shape on the ridge, too far to see clearly. She said nothing at first. Maybe it was a trapper. Maybe nothing at all. But Silas noticed too. He moved more cautiously. Began checking the perimeter twice a day. Saddled the horses each night, just in case. It came to a head on a bitter morning in early November. The cold was creeping in fast, turning the grass brittle and the earth to stone beneath their boots. Evelyn was in the barn, feeding the mare, when the sound of hooves shattered the stillness. Fast, angry, familiar, she stepped into the sunlight just in time to see the figure Dismount. Jed. He hadn't changed much. Still unshaven, still wearing that same tattered coat, now stiff with old sweat and road dust. His eyes were bloodshot, his mouth twisted in that same ugly smirk. Evelyn, he said, like a greeting, like a curse. She didn't move. You thought you could just disappear? That I wouldn't come for you? Her legs refused to work. The barn door was too far. She swallowed. What do you want? I want what's mine. Silas appeared behind her, quiet but unmistakable. He didn't draw his gun. He didn't need to. Jed saw him, and his smirk deepened. This him? Your new man? The hero who plays house with another man's wife. She's not yours, Silas. Sighed, Yet's eyes narrowed. I paid for her, same as cattle. Evelyn stepped between them, voice trembling but firm. You gave me away, Jed, for a gold coin and a crowd full of strangers. I'm not yours. Not now. Not ever. Yet's jaw twitched. You always were good at lying. Then he stepped forward, too quickly. Silas blocked him. Leave. You gonna stop me? If I have to. Jed spat at the dirt. You don't. Get it. She's carrying my child. You think I'd let my blood be raised by some washed-up rancher? Evelyn's breath caught. You lost that right the day you put your hands on me? Yet's eyes burned. You think you're safe out here? You think anyone's going to care if you vanish? Silas moved closer. Calm, direct. You're drunk. You need to get back on that horse and ride out before you make a mistake. Jed pulled a pistol from his coat. Not fast, he wanted them to see it. Too late, he said. The world froze. Evelyn didn't scream. She couldn't. Her heart pounded against her ribs like it wanted to escape. Silas stepped slightly in front of her. Yet's hand trembled, not with fear, but fury. Silas raised one hand slowly, as if calming a skittish horse. You shoot, and you don't walk away. You know that. Yet's finger tightened, but Silas was faster. His revolver was out before the trigger clicked. A single shot rang out. The sound echoed like thunder down the valley. Jed fell to his knees. Clutching his arm, the gun dropped into the dirt. Soaked his sleeve. Silas approached, slow and steady. Don't come back. Jed spat again, eyes blazing. You think this is over? Silas didn't answer. Just stood there until Jed crawled to his horse, mounted awkwardly, and vanished down the ridge, trailing blood and curses. Evelyn collapsed onto the porch, breath heaving. Silas joined her after a moment. They sat in silence, her shoulder against his. You all right? He asked softly. She nodded, eyes closed. He's not done. I know. They didn't sleep that night. Not properly. The fire burned low. Evelyn, curled up on the sofa with a rifle resting beside her, Silas seated in the chair across from the window. He never looked away from the dark outside. The next 2 days passed in anxious stillness. Every sound, the crack of a branch, the groan of the wind, sent Evelyn's heart racing. But Jed didn't return. Not yet. On the third night, the pain began. It started as a cramp in her lower back, then a sharp wave across her belly. She gripped the table, breath catching in her throat. Silas, she whispered. He was at her side. Instantly. It's time, she said. He nodded. All right, let's get you comfortable. They moved to the bed. He brought water, cloth, everything he could. She writhed, sweat beading on her brow. Hours passed. The pain didn't break. It surged and receded like waves trying to pull her under. You can do this, Silas whispered. You're the strongest person I've ever known. She screamed. The world narrowed to fire and breath. Then finally crying. Not hers. The baby's. Silas wrapped the child in a clean towel. A girl, small, red-faced, lungs like thunder. Evelyn wept, not from pain, not from fear, from something deeper, relief, awe. He placed the baby in her arms. She looked down, face glowing with sweat and tears. She's perfect, she whispered. Silas knelt beside the bed. What will you call her? Evelyn stared at the tiny face, eyes closed, fists curled tight. Clara. He looked up. That was my daughter's name. I know, she said softly. He touched the baby's tiny hand. She would have liked that. For the next few days, the world grew very small, just the cabin, the sound of firewood crackling, Clara's cries, and Evelyn's soft humming. But peace was never built to last. Jed returned 5 days later. This time he wasn't alone. 3 men rode with him, all armed, all mean. They approached at dusk, just as the sky turned copper. Evelyn saw them from the window. She handed Clara to Silas with shaking hands. "Take her. Hide." He didn't argue. Only nodded. He wrapped the baby tight, kissed Evelyn's forehead, and slipped out the back toward the barn. Jed kicked the door open like he owned it. Evelyn stood, rifle in hand. Her knees trembled. "Well, ain't this cozy?" Jed said, stepping inside. "Told you I'd be back." The men flanked him, fanning out. Evelyn didn't lower the gun. "You're not taking her." Yet's grin widened. "I don't want her. I want to make you pay." A shot rang out, not from inside, but outside. One of Yet's men collapsed in the doorway. A hole in his chest. Silas emerged from the barn, rifle still smoking. Chaos exploded. Evelyn ducked, firing once. A man screamed and fell. Jed turned, wild-eyed, charging her. She pulled the trigger empty. He slammed into her, knocking her backward. They struggled on the floor, his hands at her throat. Then another shot. Jed stiffened. Blood bloomed on his back. He slumped to the floor, dead. Silas stood in the doorway, Clara still in one arm, rifle in the other. Evelyn coughed, gasping for air. Silas rushed to her, dropping the weapon. "You all right?" She nodded. Barely. They sat there together, blood drying in the dirt, fire flickering behind them. The cabin smelled of smoke, sweat, and salvation. In the days that followed, they buried the bodies behind the ridge, marked only with stones. No words were said over Yet's grave. None were needed. Evelyn nursed Clara in the early morning light, staring out across the hills. "You don't have to stay," Silas said one morning. She looked at him. "Do you want me to?" He hesitated. "I want you to be free." She smiled. "I think this is what freedom looks like." But a week later, she packed a bag. Just a small one. Enough for her and Clara. "I need to see the world again," she told him. "Find out who I am, not just who I was." He didn't argue. He lifted Clara gently, kissed her forehead, then handed her back. "You'll come back?" He asked. "If." "I'm lucky," she said. He watched them ride away, fading into the gold of autumn. Silas stayed where he was until the wind grew cold. Then he went inside, sat by the fire, and picked up a block of wood. He carved. And outside, the kestrels flew. Alone, but not without purpose.